Scarcella from the National Research Council, the European Institute, and Giuseppe talk about fishery management from data collection to management plans. So thank you, Giuseppe. The stage is yours, and thank you, students, for your attention.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, everybody. So first of all, I would like to apologize. I'm not there and I have to do this lecture remotely, but I couldn't be there with you. So my name is Giuseppe Scarcella. As Stefano said, I work in the National Research Council as a scientist, and I mainly work on fishery management. I don't know many of you are doing this PhD specifically on fishery, but I think it's one of the main, not the most important, the central mission of this program, I think, of the PhD. And I think it's important to talk about the fishery management itself, because many times I hear a lot of colleagues that are saying that the solution in fisheries is just to stop fishing and to focus on aquaculture. The future of the ocean is without any intensive fishery. So sometimes there is a misinterpretation of what fishery management should be, and most of the time is due to the fact there is a lack of knowledge. For this reason, I wanted to start this presentation with this quote from these economists that, of course, you can't manage what you don't measure. So the reason why there is this discipline called fishery science or fishery biology that we'll talk today about this is because we have to find a way to measure what we want to manage. And to manage, we need to have the so-called harvest strategy. We will talk in detail about the harvest strategy, and I will give you the example of the harvest strategy on the mussel fishery in the Adriatic Sea. And this will be at the end of my lecture. So during the lecture, I will talk about this concept that, as I said, we can manage only with what we can measure, and why it matters in fisheries. It matters because in fisheries we need to have clear objectives that need to be measurable in indicators. So these indicators can be biological, economic, social, but also ecosystem indicators. And these are the first step in order to manage our fisheries. In order to have this indicator, you need to have a strong data collection system that turns what is a concern into evidence. So the trends, the status, and the uncertainty that we see in our measurement of the stock, they cannot be only a concern from a qualitative point of view, but needs to be also a certain quantitative. So we need to, in order to manage a stock, in order to manage a fishery, we need to have a quantitative approach. And this is very important because sometimes the anecdotal concept that this stock is overexploited, this is overfished, the Mediterranean is one of the most exploited sea, and there is all the stock are overexploited, is a concern that is not always true, and it needs to be taken case by case. And we are going to talk about the Adriatic, especially because it's a very good example, in my opinion. Another point that why this matter is the concept of the harvest strategies, because it's the link indicators to pre-agreed action that we have in the so-called harvest control rule. So these two concepts, harvest strategy and harvest control rule, will be central in this lecture. And also the other point is that the monitor close the loop. So we need not only to implement a management plan, implement a fishery management, but we need to always monitor to evaluate the outcomes. And we, of course, as a scientist, we need to provide advice in order to adjust when the performance of this management is off track. So the key, so the flow of the management should start, as always, from data collection. From data collection, we will talk about, we will have indicator that coming from stock assessment that will provide us an amount of fish in the sea. Then we have this harvest control rule that triggers certain action. The harvest control rule will be translated in management measures, management regulation, and this management regulation, they provide some outcomes. So the stock will improve. From an economic point of view, a certain fishery will improve. And this needs to be reviewed and needs to be monitored very closely. And the outcomes can be not only on the fish stock, but also they can be economic outcomes. We will talk about, for example, overcapacity. So the key takeaway is that as scientists involved in fishery, we need to invest in measurement. So survey, logbooks, observer at sea, and these all measurement enable us to have a robust and transparent decision. Okay, so I divided my lecture in four main arguments. And please stop me anytime. I have some slide for question and answer in order for you to ask me any clarification. And the first part of the lecture, I will talk about data collection very briefly because it's very complex. It's a very complex program. However, I think it's very important to start with data collection. Then we will talk about the transfer of data collection to the policy chain. So how we can estimate indicator and stock assessment, what is the toll books that we have for management, what are all the measures that we can use. And then we will talk about also a very important concept that sometimes is not considered at all in fishery management, unfortunately. That is the so-called overcapacity. So I would like to talk about this argument as well. The next part is about the so-called harvest strategy, harvest control rule. I will provide you how these are developed, what is an harvest control rule as a decision rule, and also we will talk briefly about the management strategy evaluations. And then finally, I will give you an example of the Adriatic case study. Especially, I will talk about the GFCM, the demersal management plan, that is an effort-based harvest control rule and with biomass safeguard. And we will talk about the implementation, the historical implementation of this plan, the monitoring, and what we learn from this experience. And I think this is a very important part because I will provide you an assignment, an exercise to do at home that actually can be done exactly as the case study of the Adriatic Sea, the Adriatic case study. So is for you. We will talk about this later, but is an assignment that will focus on a case study on any part of the world you want to develop. Anyway, we will talk about this later. So any questions since now? Okay, if not, I will continue. And I will start talking about the first step of any harvest control or any harvest strategy. So just to repeat, the harvest strategy is the combination of data collection, stock assessment, management decision, and management plan and monitoring of a management plan. All this is what is called a harvest strategy. And of course, a crucial part of any harvest strategy is the revision that we can done during its development. And as the cornerstone of management of a harvest strategy is the data collection. That is what feeds the management advice. So as a scientist, we do not take any decision for the management. What we do is to provide scientific advice, and we can provide robust scientific advice only if we have two things. The first thing is a very robust data collection, and the second thing is that we have very robust modeling approach in order to give the status of the stock in comparison with a reference point. We will talk about this later. But now we focus on the data collection. So we can divide data collection in two main areas: the fishery-dependent data and the fishery-independent data. So fishery-dependent data is all about the landings, the statistics by species, by size, by port, of all the fishes and resources that are exploited. Other fishery-independent data, of course, very important, is the so-called fishing effort. So how many days at sea our fleet is operating, what the engine power, what gear, in which area. So all these information are crucial, especially when we want to manage a fishery that is usually a bottom trawl fishery. Another area of very important now in the fishery-dependent data is all the logbooks. Now we have all the vessels above a certain size. They have to compile an electronic logbook with can be also sail notes. All the information that are coming from VMS or AIS are very important. And also sometimes we have also observer on board that they can provide direct information on all these quantities. The last, but not the least important, are the socioeconomic data, because of course, depending on the objective of our fishery management, also the socioeconomic data are crucially important, and the cost, the profitability, the value of the fish. Fishery is an economic activity. So of course, the price of the fish and the cost of the fuel are very important parameters that regulate all these activity. So in the fishery-dependent area, the strength is that they can be with a very high frequency. We can have electronic logbook every day, and of course they can have a very broad coverage. The risk in the fishery-dependent data is that there could be misreporting. I mean, it's not always easy to take information for logbook, and there could be change in behavior and selectivity of the fishery. That again is something that we cannot control directly with the fishery or using only fishery-dependent data. The other area that is very important for the scientists that want to be involved in the fishery science is the fishery-independent data. So the fishery-independent data are all the data that are coming from standardized scientific survey in the Mediterranean. We did, I just brought some example, the MEDITS, that is a standardized bottom trawl survey, the MEDIAS, that is again an acoustic survey, and Solomon, that is carried out in the Adriatic, that is a bin trawl survey. They provide abundance and biomass indices as spatial distribution. They are crucially important in the management decision. Also, very important from the fishery-independent data, we can also sample the biological quantities that our population, that of course it could be different from what is observed with the fishery, from the fishery-dependent data. Usually, for example, in the stock assessment, we estimate, for example, I don't know, a stock length-weight relationship from fishery data and from fishery-independent data. One can provide an idea of how to change number in weight for your fishery, but the population could be a little bit different, because maybe the fishery doesn't insist in certain area of where there are the the juvenile or where there are the big spawner. And so you have this information only using fishery independent data with standardized scientific survey. And of course, the environmental cover rates are very important because most of the modeling approach, the knowledge of temperature and not only and salinity is very important, especially because as we see, we'll see in the following slides, fishery is something that is carried out not in a closed environment. It's not an aquaculture or an aquarium, is carried out in an ecosystem. So we need to know exactly, especially now with the climate change, we need to know exactly what is happening because, of course, our results are not stable in a certain area. They move, and they move also because there are environmental cover rates. The strength of the fishery independent data is that there is a controlled design. Of course, we can decide how many stations in a certain area. We can decide the survey design if it's a random survey. So many things. So it's more controlled rather than the fishery dependent data. The limit, of course, is the cost. Scientific survey are very expensive, and the timing is also crucial important. The gear catchability is not always constant, and this is something that we need to consider. So there are pros and cons in this activity. So this is a very broad introduction of the data collection. And just to let you know, I mean, in Italy, data collection is carried out by several institutions. CNR is coordinating this institution that is that goes from university. For example, the University of Bologna is in this consortium called CONISMA, which is responsible for the medits in the Adriatic, but also there is also the private sector. So CNR is trying to coordinate this activity for all the Italian GSAs. We will talk about GSAs later when I will talk about the example of the Adriatic case study. But the main takeaway from this discussion is that any sort of harvest strategies and any sort of management needs to rely on a very robust data collection program. If you don't have a robust data collection program, for sure your management will be more uncertain, and for sure you can risk the collapse of your fishery. And when you collapse a fishery, it means that you are going to lose a lot of employment. You have a very social problem, and as happened in the cod case of Canada is one of the main example of this, that it collapsed, the stock collapsed, and 40,000 people lost their job in that area. So it's very important that that particular case didn't collapse because of the data collection, because of other issue, but actually is something that needs to be very close monitored. Sorry. So why we need all this data? We need all this data because we need to reply to this very important question: how many fish in the sea? So it sounds very absurd in a certain sense that we want to quantify how many fish are in the sea, but this is actually one of the role of the so-called fishery sciences. As fishery biologists, we divide fishery sciences to main big branches. One is related with the resources, so we need to study the population dynamic and the biology of our resources in terms of growth, mortality, reproduction, recruitment. But also a very important part of the fishery science is the fishing technologies, to know exactly the characteristic, the dynamic of the fishing gear. We need to know the selectivity, the capacity of our fleet, the activity, how the fleet is composed. So all these information are part of the fishery sciences and are needed in order to assess the status of a certain stock. What are the metrics that allow me to understand the status of a stock in the sea? There are three main metrics. The first one that are used in fishery models. The first one and the second one are the two most common, is the fish mortality. So how many fish died because of fishery, because they're exploited. And this is a parameter, this is a matrix that is always compared with a certain reference point. We will talk about reference point later. But also the other metric that is very important is the spawning biomass. So my stock is composed on how many spawners, so how many adults are in my stock and what is their biomass. And this is another crucial part of the metrics because in order to assess a stock, because a population that is composed by a lot of adults is a population that for sure is more resilient to the perturbation that are coming from fishery. The last is the population structure that usually is not always considered. For example, now it's considered in the marine strategy, but again, it is something similar to the spawning biomass, but actually is I think it is related, but it's something different. And for example, is telling us there are indicators that are telling us how many adults are in a certain population and that is exploited, and compared on how many adults that should be if there wasn't any fishery. So this indicator can give us an idea of how the population should be. And again, a truncated population, a population that is composed mainly by small and juvenile individuals, is a population that is less resilient and is a sort of bottleneck in this population. There are many pressure on fisheries, stock exploited by fishery that they determine that many populations are becoming smaller, are composed by fish that are smaller and smaller. This is actually also a genetic problem due to the fact that the fishery is exploiting always a certain part of the population, and therefore has an impact. So the study and the assessment of the population structure is crucial as well. All these metrics, of course, are assessed in the framework of the so-called stock assessment. And of course, we need a lot of knowledge that is based on the oceanography, biology, limnology, of course, ichthyology, ecology, and also economics. All this is used in order to provide advice and to do so-called fishery management. So this sort of flux is telling us that fishery management is based on a very scientific, needs to be based on a very scientific, robust activity. Because at the end, the fishery management is translated in a certain policy at the European level and or national level that needs to be based on very strong knowledge of our status of the stocks. As I said before, however, the stocks are not living alone. I mean, we are exploiting something that is part of the ecosystem. So in order to, in reality and in connection to the society and the economy, this is the package of the stock assessment and the ecosystem management that we need to understand. And I always would like to see in a simplistic way that the fish stock is composed by a certain amount of fish that increase because of the somatic growth. After a certain size, they start to die because of fishing mortality, but also they always die because of natural mortality due to the predation. But our stock can increase due to the recruitment, so new recruits that they join the stock or for the somatic growth. And you see, this is a very simplistic approach, but in this way we try to estimate the status of the stock. We try to estimate the fish mortality and other parameters like the natural mortalities are often assumed because it's almost impossible to measure. And in order to reply to the question, how many fish are in the sea, we need to always to consider this simplistic approach. And of course, this is, I want to stress that this is a very simplistic approach based on a single species. I'm not going to talk about multi-species or the ecosystem approach because it's a very much more complex idea, but have in mind that, of course, a stock is in an ecosystem and is prey and predator. So, of course, its productivity can change because of other parameters due to the environment that are exactly the abundance of predator or prey. I mean, the smell is, of course, is impacted by environmental conditions. And in order to estimate the amount of fish stock, we need to study the population process that are used in fishery biology. So usually, from the data collection, we can know the age, the lifespan, longevity, and we have age determination methods. We can, of course, know the growth of a certain stock, the growth parameter. We can know the reproduction, the size of maturity, and we try to know the natural mortality, and we try to estimate the fish mortality. So all these processes are considered in the fish stock assessment, and these can be used to study the biology of marine organisms, even if are not commercial one. And we can use all this information to assess the stock status, of course, using a single species approach and methods. Usually, stock are assessed using an age or length-based method. They require the estimation of all these biological parameters, like relationship, growth, data maturity, natural mortality, by age and by length, which is then converted to age using the von Bertalanffy equation. So, in order to have an idea of the status of a population, we need to have a very long list of parameters. But unfortunately, this is not often available. Imagine that you are in an area where data collection is only composed by fishery-dependent data, only by certain statistics, and you need to manage your fishery. And how can you manage your fishery in this case? Well, there are methods. I will talk briefly about them, but there are some called data poor method that are based only on catches. So I have just the landing by species and by year from the statistics. Maybe I can have some discard data. I can have data on effort in terms of number of vessels or number of days at sea. I can, if I'm lucky, I can have CPE from a survey if there is a survey, but I can also have CPE, catch per unit effort, using the ratio between catches and the effort unit. Also, there is the expert knowledge. So if I know certain change in fishery regulation, I can use in my model. Of course, I can know the resilience of certain species, and I can use this in my model as a prior. And in this way, I can understand the status of the stock in terms of fish mortality and total biomass. And can I have some management procedure? I can allow me to have a management procedure. Usually, stock can be assessed in this way using production model that does not require the estimation of all the biological parameters I showed you before. So having in mind, and this will be very important also for the assignment. So probably you are going to choose an area in your assignment that doesn't have any sort of fishery independent data. It doesn't have any information about the age of your catches, of your exploited biomass. So maybe you can have only catches and effort data, and so you need to manage your fishing activity in this way. There are examples that the fishery are managed only with the knowledge of the fishery statistics. I mean, many areas are managed in this way. A very important concept of MSY and reference point in fishery. For sure, you heard about the MSY acronym is a maximum sustainable yield and is one of the fundamental concepts in fishery science. It refers to the removal of the largest possible biomass without risking the collapse of a stock. So here again is a diagram, very schematic, where I have my stock in number and weight. My stock diminish because of fishing mortality and natural mortality, and can increase because of spawning with new recruits, and can increase because of the somatic growth that is dependent from the environment, from the feeding. So why I wrote here live on the interest and not on the capital? Because live on the interest, not the capital. So because you can look at this as you have a certain amount of money in the bank. So if you have your stock is 100,000 euro in the bank, so every year you have a certain interest, and if you are lucky, I don't know, just say number, you have the 10%. So your bank account every year will increase due to the interest of 10%. So this 10% can diminish because you use the money, you buy thing, and this is the fishing mortality, or because of taxes, and this is a sort of natural mortality, let's say. So until these two metrics are below a certain 10%, of course your stock is going to increase and you don't have problem. But if you use more than 10%, if you every year you use 10, 15,000 euro instead of the 10% that is 10,000, so your stock slowly is going to diminish, and your interest that is constituted by the spawning of the recruitment is not going to establish the initial amount of the stock. So in economic term, we can have this sort of metaphor where the stock is like we have a certain amount of money in the bank, and so we need always to be very, very careful in the way we use this amount in the bank. And if we want to in fishery science, we use this classic curve where we put in correlation the increase in fishing effort and fishing mortality, even if the two things are not directly correlated. And in the y-axis, I have my fishery production. So if we start on a very low fishing effort, we are on the left side of this curve, that is, let's say, the good side, until we reach this maximum, that is this maximum sustainable yield. And if we increase our fishing effort, if we increase our fishing mortality, of course, we go toward a risk of collapse of our stock. And this is something that we want to avoid as much as possible. And this is also the concept of overfishing and overfished stock. That is something that we will talk about. But in general, we in fishery science, we always try stock doing this kind of curve. This is just an example. shape of this curve can change depending on the model we are using. This is a Chef model, for example, one of the most simple model that is used in production model. But you see that a certain increase of fish mortality at equilibrium can produce the maximum sustainable yield that is not going to be cost our fishing effort, our fishing mortality. And just to talk about the metrics that we use in we discuss today now about the how to measure the status of the stock. We have the fishing mortality. So every year, this is an example, Adriatic hake. Stock assessment some years ago, that every year we try to estimate the fishing mortality with a certain range of uncertainty and the total biomass. Okay, the total biomass, of course, is not the best parameter, but it's just an example, just to tell you that for this stock is clear out since the beginning of the model, the 80s, there was an increase in fishing mortality and a decrease of the total biomass at sea. And this is shown also by the biomass survey index that is coming from the MEDITS carried out in the Adriatic Sea. So this is just an example to give you an idea of how we measure the status of the stock. And on the basis of this, we will have certain management options. So the management options could be controlled by input or output. So, for example, the input management options are the access to certain ground, the number of vessels, the seasonal closure. The output that are more effective in a certain sense are the catches. So, for example, we can limit the number of fishing vessels, the dimension, the power, and this is an input control. Or we can limit the catches with the TAC, the total allowable catches. And this limit, of course, needs to be based on the stock assessment, on the parameter that we discussed before. Also, there are other input control, like the time closure. So you know that there is in the Adriatic or in the other Italian GSA, we have the summer fishing ban, and this is a clear input control. Or we can have some technical time closures, or we have another one is the certain sides. Now is called because of the landing obligation, this concept is changed, but anyway, I don't want to go in detail in this. Technical measures about the gear properties, and also there are another very important management option that I think is in certain area could be one of the most important is the spatial restrictions. So just this an example of spatial restriction that I always give is the closure of the 3 nautical miles in the Adriatic, the Italian side. That is very effective measure, especially when after fishing ban since 2012 now we have the closure of the 6 nautical miles. So trawling activity is not allowed within the 6 nautical miles, and this is had a very important impact, positive impact on the stock of common sole, for example, which is one of the main stock I study. So it's almost 40 minutes I'm talking. I would like to have some question and some feedback from you, because I'm not doing me, I'm just doing for you. So is there the possibility to have some microphone there? It's all clear. Sì?
Can you hear? Here? Okay. We have a microphone in the room. So if I don't know, student has question, can hear on the table and ask you, because the camera is in front of the computer.
Okay. No problem. No problem. Yes. Well, just to have an idea, how many of you are doing a PhD on fishery? When I say fishery, of course, it's a very large topic, but
Raise your hand, student.
just to give me an idea. I cannot see.
I count 1, 2, 3, 4 students, 5.
Okay. Okay. So I'm sorry for all the other that I have to listen this.
5 students.
Okay. And overall, you are 30. Are you around 30?
Yes.
So it's not a big amount, and so I'm sorry, maybe it's a boring lecture for you, for all the others, but I think, as I said before, I think in this PhD program, I think it's very important to talk about fishery and fishery management overall. Okay. If there is no question, I will continue with another concept that I was considering before, but please stop me anytime. And now I'm going to talk about a very hot topic in fishery management, that is the so-called overcapacity. Just to give some background, EU, all the member states has to comply with these guidelines that they decide on a balance between fishing capacity and fishing opportunities. So there is a technical committee for the European, working for the European Commission, that try to estimate what is the best fishing capacity. So fishing, when I say fishing capacity, I mean the definition of fishing capacity is the number of vessels, not the days, not the gear. No, the gear is important. So the definition of fishing capacity is the number of vessels by fleet segment. So a certain gear used from the vessel with a certain size. Usually is every 6 meters. So we can consider I don't know, fleet segment is passive gear from 0 to 6 meters. That of course is a very small fleet segment, or trawler between 12 and 18 meters. So these are the fleet segment. That is the unit that we consider when we want to talk about fishing capacity. And according to these guidelines, there should be a balance between fishing capacity and fishing opportunities. Fishing opportunities that for the stock that are managed using TAC, like in the northern countries, is very easy. So fishing opportunity is the catch, the quota, so the TAC, the total allowable catch, but can be also considered in terms of effort. And there are these guidelines from the Commission that needs to be a monitor every year of the balance between fishing capacity and fishing opportunity. And why this is very important? Because EU has since many years now developing a sort of measure that is going to provide funds, money, in order to what can I say? In order to stop some certain fishing vessels. So if you are the owner fishing vessel, you can apply to a certain funds, and you or the national authority is going to provide money in order to destroy your vessel. And if a fleet segment is in overcapacity, you move a vessel, and of course the overcapacity is going to diminish. Of course, this is very not adapt. The contrary is the contrary of any sort of adaptive management approach, because once you destroy the vessel, that one is not anymore cannot be managed. And many times, for many years, the Commission is going to do the permanent cessation of vessels that maybe are the oldest. And so this measure not only not always can be very effective, but it's very important that we try to understand the set of overcapacity, because, as I said before, is very often is not an easy definition of how can we define if a fleet segment is in overcapacity or not, and it's very uneasy. This is a Supreme Court that I don't know what a certain thing is, but I know when I see it, and we can replace H with overcapacity, and I understand. I think this was used by the Supreme Court of US for the pornography. I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it, and we can replace this with the overcapacity concept. And so these guidelines from the member states that from the Commission are tool to help the member states in order to understand the balance that there is between fishing capacity and fishing opportunities, and so providing an answer to the lack of knowledge that we had before. There are three types of indicators. I'm going to talk only about one, because this lecture is not about overcapacity. We would need a week probably, but there are biological, economic, and technical indicators. The biological indicator are two. I will talk only about the sustainable harvest indicator, but so I will talk later about this. But there is also the SAR, that is the stock at risk indicator. So a certain fleet segment, for example, is fishing 10 stock. How many of them are at risk? And we define at risk when the biomass that we saw before is below a certain threshold that technically we call BLIM. And is a threshold, is a reference point actually, that is going to tell me, okay, what is the risk of recruitment impairment? So the lowest stock can be that the recruitment would be impaired. And so this usually is called, in European context, is called BLIM, and can be defined in very, very various ways. For example, in certain areas, 20% or 15% of the biomass we would have without fishery. That is the bit zero. It's called bit zero. So the biomass you reach if there is no fishery. Another concept is the BMSY. So we saw the BMSY, it is the biomass you have if you fish your stock for an infinite time at FMSY. And for example, a risk indicator could, that's why 50% of BMSY, it means that your stock is at risk. But could be other indicators like the economic indicator, so the ROI, the CRBR. So these are very economic, and honestly, I'm not so expert in these. Other technical indicators are the inactive fleet and the vessel utilization. So if I have, for example, I have a certain fleet segment composed by 50 vessels, and these 50 vessels, only 10 are active every day. The other are active once per month. It means this is an indicator that gives us an idea that probably this fleet segment is composed by too many boats that are try to exploit very few resources, because it's not worth it to go every day. It means that the resources are very few. But I want to talk about the sustainable harvesting indicator in more detail. This SHI is a weighted average of fishing mortality, of the fishing mortality ratio between F and FMSY. And is a weighted average because the weight is done by the value of the landing. So imagine you have a fleet segment that is exploiting, I don't know, 10 stock, and you have the ratio of F over FMSY of each stock, and this average is weighted with the value of each stock, because of course the value in terms of money of each stock is not the same. I mean, fleet segment can exploit a bluefin tuna and also skipjack tuna, and of course their value is completely different. And so try to put all these together is an indicator that trying to link the economy using value of the landings, but also the ecology, so the knowledge of the stock status. And this is the formula. And usually, if the indicator is for a certain fleet segment, if this indicator is above 1, it means that my fleet segment is in overcapacity, and so it means that there is a high need of reduce the number of vessels. So the national authority using EMFF money, using money from the European Commission, can do a tender so that there will be a permanent cessation of a certain I don't know, 3 vessels. So all the owner of the vessel that they want to stop their activity, they apply a certain criteria, a ranking, and only the first 3 they can access to this fund, so they can take the money in order to stop fishing. It sounds very strange for economic activity that someone is paying me so I don't do my activity, but actually is something that in the past 10, 15 years, even 20 years, has been used a lot in Italy, and a lot of the fleet has been scrapped using these funds. So I think it's very important that you know that in the fishery management, especially in the Italian fishery management, the overcapacity has been an issue, is still an issue in my opinion, and there is a way in the European context in order to try to fight the overcapacity. So any question about this concept of the overcapacity? I just want to stop here because as I said, it's a very important concept, and many times I hear people talking about the fact that the fleet segment are becoming smaller and smaller in terms of number, and nobody knows that there is a regulation behind, there is a process behind that allow the owner of the fishing vessel to apply for a fund in order to stop fishing. And this is very important, and at the end is tax money, so is all the taxes we pay are used also for this. So I think it's very important that the citizen, we know how the European government is, the European institutions are using our money in this sense. There are, of course, this is a concept that is very European focused concept. And there are other areas of the world, like in Iceland, for example, where the overcapacity concept is not considered at all, because they try to exploit the resources in a sustainable way, and they try to export as much as they can. So of course they use the tax or the taxes they are using more on the research, on the data collection rather than to apply for permanent cessation of the fishing activity. But of course, this is another concept and it's another area. But again, it would be a very nice example if some of you in the assignment I will give you will consider Iceland, for example. That is very interesting. Okay, if there is no question, I would continue. Please.
Do you have question, students? No? Speak no. Of course, if you want, we can do a break or maybe after.
Sorry, I can't understand.
No, I ask your question, but there is a question.
Non capisco. Sento molto male.
I asked for a question, but there are no questions.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to stop for 10 minutes or?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So it's
Mhm.
10:27. We start again 10:45.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I will focus again on what is an harvest strategy, and I will talk more in detail about the harvest control rule. And I will recap. This slide is just to recap what is an harvest strategy. An harvest strategy is a pre-agreed framework that is linking monitoring, decision rule, and then management actions. And of course, the management decision can be set on setting efforts or catch limits in the case of TAC, and they have to be based on certain indicator in fisheries. And of course, all these has to be considered that we don't know the exact amount of our fish in the stocks, of our number of fish that are in a certain stock. And of course, all these has to be considered under the framework that has uncertainty. But in order to start any harvest strategy, we need the objectives. We need to define the objectives. So our objectives can be a combination of ecological, social, and economic. For example, we want that a certain stock is going to provide a certain amount of employment, and this is a social objective, a certain amount of salary, this is an economic one, but also that is not disturbing a lot the ecosystem, and this is for sure an ecological one. Once we define the objective, of course, we need to define what is the best monitoring approach in order to have to fulfill these objectives, this aim of my harvest strategy. And of course, if my objectives are mainly focused on the economic, of course, I will increase my data collection on the economic parameters. But usually, the most important is the biological ones, usually. Then we have the assessment of the indicators. So we have F over FMSY, E over BMSY, or population structure indicator. Of course, these are defined in relation to certain reference point and certain trigger point. So usually a reference point and trigger point can be used together, but the definition is that a trigger point is a level of a certain biomass that trigger a certain reply from management. And these are well defined in the any harvest control rule that I will show you in the next slide in more detail. But a harvest control rule is a pre-agreed rules that are going to determine a certain change in effort or in catches if my biomass in terms of indicator of a certain stock is going below a certain threshold that triggers actually a certain action. So these are the harvest control rules are translated in management measures that, as I said, could be fishing days or fishing area closure. These management measures, of course, are implemented by the management authority. And another very important point that this needs to be evaluated, and this can be done in a fully statistical approach that consider uncertainty, that is the management strategy evaluation. Again, is a very large, complex argument, but it needs to be reviewed, of course, because certain management options, for example, are not effective or can have the side effects like the decrease of employment that are need to be considered. And so the evaluation of the monitor of my harvest strategy is important as the data collection in a certain sense. So the key idea is to reduce the ad hoc decision by agreeing in advance how management respond when indicator change. And this is the main topic and central topic on any harvest control rule. So why we need harvest control rule? Because they make management predictable and transparent, first of all, link the decision to objectives and reference point, handle uncertainty with safeguards. So you use this biomass trigger that they can consider uncertainty. And also from a political point of view, they reduce negotiation each year. So imagine if each year we have to redecide on how we can re-implement all our harvest strategies. It would be very difficult. And most of the time, the harvest control rules, for example, from a fisherman side, they request, okay, I agree that these harvest control rule, a certain harvest control rule that are going to decrease my catches, but please don't decrease my catches more than 10% every year, because it's also for a market demand that fishermen and the fish, not only the fishermen, but all the actors that are involved, so all fishmonger, all the great distribution needs to have a certain amount of product in order to continue their activity. For a very simple example on how important are the harvest control rule is in the tuna fisheries. In tuna fisheries, in many cases, there is a long negotiation in order to have harvest control rule that would allow the production to be more or less constant, because there are factories that are producing tuna cans that needs to have a certain amount of product in order to be effective in economic terms. So when harvest control rule is developed, of course, we can consider all the common structure that I will talk now, but we have also to consider that the changes year by year sometimes need to be strategic, and need to be not very high. I mean, the closure of a fishery should be an action that is going to be the last exception of any fishery management. And this is on the right. You have a very simple example that would bring you the connection in your harvest control rule. Imagine you want to develop a harvest control rule for a tuna stock. Every year or every 2-3 years, you do the assessment of the stock, of the status of the stock, and you have always the ratio between B and BMSY or any other reference point that is around 1. So you are in the green area, and you can continue to exploit the stock at the high level, at the level that has been the same since many years. In the following years, you see that there is a decrease of the biomass. You go from BPA, so a precautionary level, to a rabilim, and you see that on y-axis you have your exploitation that is going to be reduced until you arrive to an exploitation that is 0, when you have your stock that is below your limit reference point. And as I said before, this limit reference point can be the point where recruitment is impaired, when you have the risk of very collapse because you don't have enough adult in your stock that would produce enough eggs, enough larvae, enough requisites for the replacement of this of your stock. So usually is used a traffic light approach with the red that you need to rebuild, so you need to close the fishery, amber as safeguard, you need to monitor closely, or green, you can continue your activity as normal. And this is a very generic example. In reality, of course, it's not always so easy, because the fishery is not always targeting one stock. It's the Mediterranean, we have a multi-specific fishery, so it's much more complex. And I'm going to talk about this in the example for the Adriatic. Of course, all the harvest control rule needs to be evaluated. This is carried out with this framework that is very important now. All the fisheries now are needs to be tested. The harvest strategies need to be tested with simulation. So the simulation is carried out with this process that is called management strategy evaluation. The question is that the MSC try to answer is, will this harvest strategy meet our objectives across plausible features? So basically, what is carried out in the framework of a management strategy evaluation is to compare candidate harvest control rule and management measures under certain uncertainty, because I remind you that recruitment, catchability, but also the compliance, also the climate are all parameters that are influencing my status, my process in terms of uncertainty, because the recruitment can change year by year because of environmental parameters, especially for small pelagic. So one of the most challenging fishery management is the management of small pelagic, because of or short-lived species, even more, like cephalopods. But also the catchability of my fleet. When I say catchability is the process of how effective are my gears in terms of exploiting a certain resource. And the catchability can increase or decrease. Usually in the years, my catchability with the improvement of the technology has increased a lot. Another area of uncertainty, another measure of uncertainty is the compliance. If I don't have a good control system, if my Coast Guard is not finance supported well in economic terms, and the compliance of a certain regulation is very low, if there is a recurrent non-compliance of a certain rule, of course, my uncertainty of the effectiveness of a certain harvest control rule is going to be very low. And also the climate is another source of uncertainty. So the management strategy evaluation trying to do a simulation of all the harvest control rules that can be applied in an uncertainty framework. Of course, it evaluates also the trade-off. So the rebuilding speed versus the stability, the yield versus the risk, or the ecosystem versus economics. So I want, for example, I want to have a rebuild of a certain stock in 5 years, but also I want to have a certain stability of my catches, or a certain change year by year of a small percentage. Again, this is something that can be evaluated. This trade-off can be evaluated in the framework of management strategy evaluation. Select a robust strategies, then monitor and revise as evidence accumulates. So the really good thing is that in my harvest strategy, I can have an MSC approach that tell me, look, if you are not going to have a very good data collection every year, probably your risk will increase. So you can also select this robust parameter in your management strategy evaluation. And the performance metrics could be, for example, the probability that my biomass will go below BLIM with a certain exploitation level. What are the long-term yield? Allow a certain interannual variability. Also the bycatch, so all the discards of all the species, or the impact on the species that are not part of the management. Also the metrics related to the profits, and also the metrics related to the fact that I don't want to move my fleet in different areas. So all this can be performance metric that can be considered in your simulation. So the management strategy evaluation is a simulation. So imagine that when you are in a lab, you can simulate certain experimental condition. Of course, you cannot do this in the sea. So you need to do this simulation circle in order to have an idea of what happened in an uncertainty framework. So you have your operating model, that is your initial true system. So your operating model is the way you see the population and the structure of the population. On this operating model, that is the real population at sea, you apply certain rules. You apply certain rules that you evaluate with a certain stock assessment model. And these are, of course, in an uncertainty framework where your observation, your data that you use in order to evaluate if the harvest control rules are working, of course, are affected by the observation error. So I'm not going into detail between in a management strategy evaluation, just have just important for you that you have an idea that the best fishery management in the world that usually is in the tuna framework, for example, is dependent on this management strategy evaluation. And this is very important because when you try to simulate the fishery, of course, you can involve stakeholders that are not only scientists, but are, for example, fishing operators that will tell you what is the best performance metrics that they need to consider. For the scientists, of course, maybe we focus only on probability of biomass is not going below a certain level, or the risk you have you don't want more than 5% risk that your biomass is going below BLIM due to the certain level of catch. And this, for the scientists, for example, could be a very important metric, but fishing operators could have another important metric that is the interannual variability. They want to have, for obvious reason, for economic reason, they want to have not more than 5% change, not only in decrease, but also in increase of a certain yield. Because sometimes the increase of the yield will have economic effects that are not sustained by the fishing operator, because of course, if you increase the yield, if you increase the production, your price is going to be lower, and of course you can have some side effect in this sense that the fishing operators they don't want. So this is more or less the circle of the management strategy evaluation simulation that is used in many frameworks. Okay, before I start to talk about the Adriatic case studies, is there any question, or can I continue with this?
Students, do you have questions?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for asking. Anyway, stop me anytime. So now I want to talk about the GFCM Adriatic demersal management plan. How the effort-based harvest control rule are working from 2020, since the beginning was implemented to now. Okay, later I will talk about what is GFCM, what is this acronym, but just to have in mind that all the fishery activity, the professional fishery are managed under certain RFMOs. RFMOs is a regional fishery management organization, and the one responsible for the management of the Mediterranean stock is the General Fishery Commission of the Mediterranean, which is a UN organization under FAO that has the objective to sustainable manage the fishing stocks, not only the demersal, of course, but also the small pelagic. While for the large pelagic, you know for sure ICAT is the other RFMO that is relevant for the Italian fisheries. Mainly are these two. Again, this is something that we will see in the assignment. So the Adriatic Sea, before we start talking about the management plan, I want to give you an idea of what is the Adriatic Sea. For sure, you have already, this. This is the structure of the geomorphology of the Adriatic Sea. Is a shallow water with a surface temperature that is goes between 12 and 24 degrees. Low salinity and a very high productivity. Here is a map of the high productivity of thermochlorophyll. So it's a very is a bottom troll fishing footprint. It's one of is a paper of some years ago that is one of the areas with the highest bottom troll activity. Mainly because is ideal for bottom troll because it's soft bottom and shallow waters. And as you can see, this is the fishing activity, for example, for from IS data of the bottom water trawl in 2014, and you can see that the fishing activity is not allowed within the 3 nautical miles, the bottom trawl activity, but outside it is very, very dark red. It means that there is a very high bottom trawling activity. And these are all information that before you start any sort of fishery management, you need to have the knowledge of your area. And in your assignment, I would ask you to study, to find this kind of information in order to have a preamble, in order to have an introduction of your area. Because if you don't have this knowledge, of course, any kind of harvest strategy you would like to develop is probably going to fail. In terms of management decision, as I said, the fishery in this area is managed from the General Fishery Commission of the Mediterranean, GFCM, and GFCM divided the entire Mediterranean and the Black Sea in different geographical sub-areas. We say GSA. That for the Adriatic in the case of the Adriatic is composed by 2 GSA, 17 and 18, and these are the management units. As you of course know, the Adriatic has a different geopolitical asset because there are countries that are EU member states like Italy, Slovenia, and Croatia, but also non-EU member states like Montenegro and Albania. Therefore, you need this kind of the resources are shared. All the resources are shared among these countries, and especially for small pelagic are also shared with non-EU countries. This is the reason why there is a very important role of fishery commission like the GFCM, because you have in the same table different countries with probably different objectives in terms of sustainable exploitation. Another very important area to know is the composition of your fleet. In the Adriatic, you have any kind of gear, from surrounding net, seine net, troll net, dredge. So all these are active gears, but also are very important the passive gear, as gill net and traps or hooks and line, long line. So it's just want to give you an idea of how the fishery is composed in this area. And these are all data. It's just an example of the composition of the catches all in GSA 17. So half of them are composed by small pelagic, anchovy sardine. In terms of weight is around 90,000 tons in 2015. And all the other percentage is composed by mainly demersal stocks. So now we are going to focus on the management of these other 50%. And it's very important because from an economic point of view, I don't have here a slide, but from an economic point of view, the demersal fishery, of course, could be even higher than 50%. So this was one of the reasons why the GFCM framework has been developed a demersal management plan. And also, the demersal management plan is going to focus on certain target stocks that are hake, common sole, red mullet, pink scrimp, and Norway lobster. And we are going to, that probably are not important in terms of total catches, but are very important in terms of landing. And again, this is just the Italian, this 90,000 tons is just from the Italian side. So imagine that the GFCM demersal plan is focusing on in the catches of all the countries, not only the Italians. Another knowledge that you need to have in order to develop an effective management plan is, of course, the knowledge of your fleet in terms of number of vessels and their length, their gross tonnage, the kilowatt of the engine, the gear they're using, and if this information is needs to be per harbor, the fishing area, and you can have, of course, this example from OTB and TBB, you can have from VMS data, but in the case your vessel doesn't have any VMS data, you can have an estimation using a model from a colleague in Greece that is for the small-scale fleet. Another area of knowledge that is very important is the fuel consumption, because it's a metric of the economic term you have. Of course, you need to know the landing, the CPUE, the assessment and market price of the target stocks, and of course, the spatial distribution of the target stocks can come from the troll survey. Now, actually, the mistake is 5 stocks that are for the demersal. Just to give you an idea of how is composed the management in the Adriatic in terms for the demersal, you have this committee of fishery under the GFCM, that is the Regional Fishery Management Organization, that is the framework where the stock assessment is carried out, where the recommendations are made by the working group to the Commission. Of course, for the European country, you have another committee called STCF, where that usually the European Commission consult this group for any matter from the biological part, but also from the economic side. And all of them, they are a very important player in the data collection framework, because both of them are using data from the data collection framework. So this is just to give you an idea of the policy that is applied in the Adriatic for the demersal stocks. That is coming from GFCM, but also from the European Commission, because, of course, the European Commission are providing the funds for the data collection. Okay, I will continue because it's important now that we focus on the management plan. What is the plan and what does it manage? So the plan, of course, is a plan on the Adriatic Sea. So it's based, is going to be was developed for GSA 1718, and try to apply an effort regime for the towed gears, targeting some key demersal stock. So the focus of the management plan is on mainly on trawler. So it doesn't consider directly, I would say, the other gears. The key stock are European hake, red mullet, deep water shrimp, Norway lobster, and common sole. Common sole actually is only considered in the Northern Adriatic because it's very low catches in the South Adriatic. Main effort controlled here are bottom water troll and beam troll. In the plan are included also passing gear and OTT is the other gear that has been considered in the transitional regime, but at the moment are not included. And the goal post of the plan is to maintain fish mortality consistent with the FMSY, with safeguard if spawning biomass fall below BPA or BIM. So as you see, the objective is to have these resources fished at FMSY. This is the main role of the management plan. In order to do this, of course, you need a yearly assessment of the status of the stocks. And you can have this only if you have a good data collection system. So the SAC provide the scientific advice in terms of stock status and F and SSB in terms of trends compared with the reference point. There is a decision rule that set the annual maximum effort for the troll fleet, so the maximum number of fishing days, and these are allocated by country and by effort group and vessel length. At the moment, we are focusing on OTB, bottom troll, and TBB, that is the bin troll. So the implementation of the plan has two phases. The initial phase, there was the transitional precautionary effort regime that aimed at a global reduction, because still the status of the stock was not clear, and also was not clear the way to allocate the effort among the CPC. The CPC is the country, the participant countries, and was also used to build the baseline for the annual advice in order to drive the quota of effort regime. And then you have the other stage of the plan, that was the 5-year effort regime that actually ended this year. And each year there was a decision of the quota that has been set on the basis of the scientific advice. So we can say that the management plan, the management is responsive on the status of the stock, and this is a very important point. And this is expressed as fishing days per CPC and effort group. So you have the fishing days defined for Italy, otter troll, 12, 16. This is an example. And you have 10,000 fishing days per year. And of course, you have to look also at your biomass level, because if the biomass level is low, of course, you need to do some safeguards. And why safeguard matter? Because the effort-based rule are input control. So the safeguards ensure that if the stock spawning biomass is too low, the allowable effort must be reduced beyond the FMSY, because it's a very basic rule of any population dynamic, is that if your stock is below a certain threshold in terms of biomass, you need a very low fishing pressure in order to rebuild your stock at BMSY level. And in particular, in the Adriatic plan, these safeguards are defined using two biomass thresholds. The first one is the BPA, so is the first trigger. So effort must be set a level consistent with fishing mortality lower than FMSY, taking into account this biomass decline. So if your biomass is below this BPA, your F should be below FMSY. If is even lower than BPA, so this BLIM, more remedial measure may be included as the suspension of target fishery. So you actually have an additional reduction of fishing effort or implement some catch limits. And how the harvest control rule are tightness. So you consider that you can be in a green area where you have your biomass above BPA. Usually BPA is a certain amount above BLIM, usually is a threshold above BLIM. And you can fish, in this case, you can fish above at FMSY. When you are between BPA and BLIM, you set your effort below FMSY. If you are below BLIM, you do some additional measure. And of course, this is can be very criticized because the BPA, the relation between BPA and BMSY is not always clear. At the moment, BPA is defined as 1.6 times BLIM, and this could be a lower threshold than BMSY. So in some area, in some NGOs are criticizing the use of BPA. However, at the moment, the management plan is working in this way. And this is just an example of how the harvest control rule works if you have a certain area below a certain buffer zone. So how the effort is defined and allocated. So the effort unit segmentation, the unit is fishing day. This has to be reported by and managed by effort group, so gear, time, vessel, and class. And there is, as I say, there is an annual allocation that is expressed for each country for and effort group. How these fishing days, this effort is allocated. So the countries share the total effort reduction and are proportional to their contribution effort in the reference period, using a formula that was defined in the plan. So basically, you have an idea from an historical idea of the fishing days of any country. So when you decide a reduction, you decide the reduction in combination with this historical level, historical threshold. Of course, this formula has been revised, and there are special cases with if the national fleet is very low, sometimes the reduction is there is an exception in reduction. This is the case, for example, of Slovenia, that doesn't have a big fleet. So to reduce even more the fishing days in certain countries is completely useless. And there is also a certain flexibility. So the CPC can transfer fishing days across effort group within the same GSA and gear. And in order to do this flexibility, of course, you need to have a conversion factor based on the best available scientific advice. So you can move, for example, fishing days from OTB more than 24 to smaller, but of course, you need to have a conversion factor, because as a big trawler fish in a more effective way than a smaller trawl. And these are the effort group. This is just an example. There are much more than this, but this is just an example of the effort group that are considered in the demersal management plan. And this is a very interesting case. So in this case, I took the stock assessment output of the 5 demersal stock that are the target stock of the management plan. And you can see that in most of the cases, the fishing mortality was more or less the ratio between fishing mortality and the FMSY. The target was usually 10% or a little bit higher than the FMSY, than the target, and this was for the pink scrimp, but also for the hake. Differently, for the red mullet, the situation was better. The fishing mortality was below. Also for the common sole, they were in a situation of underexploitation. The Norway lobster is a very complex case, because the Norway lobster in the Adriatic is composed by several functional units. Some of them are in a condition of overfishing, so an F above FMSY, some other are below. So after this, the evaluation of the status of these 5 stocks, it was decided in 2024. It was decided that there was a 10% reduction in order to have in order to reach FMSY by 2026. It was the aim of the plan. So this is the annual adjustment that has been carried out in terms of fishing days for the blue line, the bottom water trawl, and the green line, that is the beam trawl. You can see that the beam trawl started from a reduction of 15%, because at that time the main target resource, that was the common sole, was in very high exploitation. So the exploitation decreased, and as you see now, the decrease that has been decided in terms of fishing days changed from less than 5%, and now GFCM is proposing an increase of fishing effort for the mid-troll. Differently, you see that in 2024, it was decided a 10% reduction of the fishing days up to 2026. So the OTB sees this steady cuts of the science-driven effort quota, while the TBB, the bin troll, there is an increase. So what working look like of an effort harvest control rule? First of all, there is a clear annual update cycle. So every year I have my stock assessment, and every year I can decide, the GFCM decides on the effort quota. You can adjust by year and fleet segment, and the aim is to track a pathway toward the real FMSY. So the management plan of the Adriatic, it finishes this year, finish in 2026, and we can say that we are almost there, because the new evaluation, the stock status is improving. And of course, we can see signal of improvement and decrease. We will talk about this, as I said. So making an effort control real monitoring, reporting, and stop and when we can stop fishing. So first of all, in the management plan, we need to track the fleet. So we have the definition of the authorized vessel only. So we know that our fleet is composed by a certain amount of fishing vessel, and this is very important, because in some area, like I don't know, the Northern African countries, sometimes you don't even know how are the real number of vessels. And so if you don't know the real number of vessels, it's very difficult to manage your fleet in terms of effort control. Then another important point to track your fleet is to have the use of this vessel monitoring system for vessels bigger than 12 meters from 2021. And also you need to provide solution in order to assess the position of the smaller vessel. Another important point in order to have a monitoring of your effort is to you track the catch and the effort. So the management plan deems that you have electronic logbook for the fishing vessel bigger than 12 meters. Anyway, all logbook catch reporting has to be reported for the key stock, and the effort has to be monitored by fishing days for each effort group. And also the management plan enforces the limit. If an effort quota is exhausted, the CPC must notify this to GFCM. So if at the end of the year you fished more days than you should, you need to notify this to GFCM. Of course, the national authorities must prohibit any further fishing in the fishery when your quota is reached. And also you need to design certain port and the inspection that needs to be a risk-based approach in order to support the compliance. So all these part of the management plan are well defined and are very important, because it's not enough to decide an effort limit on the best scientific advice if the implementation of this effort limit is not monitored, if you don't have the system to track your catches, if you don't have a good data collection system, and if you don't have a system to track your vessel. And now I'm focused on the part of the management plan that use this harvest control rule and use this effort limit. But have in mind that in the management plan are very important measures defined, like the spatial measures. For example, in order to protect certain target species, there is the Pomo Jabuka pit closure. There is the closure of the 3 nautical miles in the Italian side. In the Croatian side, again, some area within the island are are permanent closed to the bottom troll. So there is also a long list of spatial measures and technical measures that are going together with this effort control. And what is the situation now? The situation now is that in 2025, the last stock assessment that have in mind that in 2025 we know the situation of the status of the stock in 24. So at the moment we are 2 years behind, but this is of course due to the fact that data are not always available as soon as they are collected. So 4 of 5 key demersal stock show positive trend under the plan. So the plan worked for most of the stocks. In particular, common sole is described as sustainable exploited. The harvest control rule continues to reduce the OTB effort, while they allow an increase in 2026 of the bin troll. And why the 2026 split matters? Because an effort harvest control is not just cut every year. A key test is whether you can keep tightening where overexploitation persists and to avoid unnecessary restriction where a stock gear combination appear on track. So it's very important that you have a certain flexibility in order to can increase the effort on that vessel, on that fleet segment that allow a certain that allow the target stock that are in a sustainable exploitation, like the common sole. So the 2026 does exactly that, because the OTB is going to be reduced by almost 10%. Instead, there is the advice to increase 3% the bin troll survey. The bin troll activity that bin troll is mainly used by Italy and in a certain part also by Croatia. Have in mind that one key issue in the management plan of the Adriatic is the status of Norway lobster. And this is because Norway lobster, of course, has been a very important resource that had an impact not only on the fishing pressure, but probably for sure had an impact also from the increase of temperature that for sure had determined a lower productivity of the stock. Because as the name says, this is a species that prefer cold, temperate water. Therefore, with the increase of temperature, probably there is also an increase of or a decrease of productivity of these stocks. So Norway lobster need to be very close monitored. For example, one of the main reasons there is the permanent closure of the central area of Pomo Yabukapiti is just to protect the population there. At the moment, the assessment of Norway lobster is carried out with a very complex model. That is a model by area where are assumed to be 4 different functional units, one in the Pomo pit, one in the Southern Adriatic, one in the Croatian side, and one in the Italian side outside Pomo pit. And the last stock assessment showed us that each functional unit has a different stock status. Of course, Pomo pit, because there is this permanent closure, the stock is increasing, while in other area there is a very high depletion of this stock. So for sure, the management plan for the demersal in the Adriatic, I would say that in the last 5 years worked, because there was an important effort reduction every year, especially of OTB, and there was an increase of certain stock like red mullet, for example. But anyway, there are some stocks that are still under very low biomass. So again, what looks strong? Clear annual set limit cycle. So you have harvest control rule that has been applied clearly in a transparent way every year. Rules are anchored with the FMSY and safeguards reference point. Allows a certain difference of effort regulation by year. That is very important. Transfer mechanisms are allowed, so there is an operational flexibility that you can transfer fishing days from a effort group to another one, and also among countries. What is the hard part? The hard part and the difficult side of this management plan is the fact that, as you know, effort fishing days is different from fishing mortality. So catchability change, as I said before, there is this effort creep. So every year, the technology that we apply in fishery increase the catchability. So manage a stock using effort is not always the best option, but sometimes is the only option. Mixed fishery, the problem is that in the demersal fishery is a mixed fishery, and 1 year can affect multiple stocks. So have in mind that we are focusing only on 5 stocks, but the stocks that are fished in the Adriatic by otter trawl are more than 5, and so this has to be considered. Also, there is a risk of displacement. So maybe I have less fishing days, so I try to, my fleet is displaced in area where there is higher risk of overexploitation of juvenile, for example. Another very hard part in the management plan is that the very time data consuming, and we need to have a strong compliance to work as designed. So you need to have a very strong control on the number of fishing days. So you need to have a system in place that allows you to understand immediately from, for example, VMS data, how many fishing days has been used. And when you reach this limit, you need to close the fishery. And this system is not always very responsive in all the countries that are involved in the demersal management plan of the Adriatic. Finally, some final point before I close and I show you the assignment. The takeaways from this lecture. First of all, data collection is the foundation of any sort of harvest strategy. So consistent surveys, good data on effort and catch and reporting is the first stage for any harvest strategy. The next point is that indicators, reference points, translate observation into decision relevant signals. So I'm very upset when I hear, we need to close the fishery. Okay, when you say this, when scientists advise this, they need to show the numbers, the indicators. You cannot advise close the fishery, close the trawl fishery if you don't have this information. And this decision relevant signal needs to be quantified, needs to be reported in a very transparent way with stock assessment form that has to be publicly available. This is a very crucial point that many scientists, they like to say, the only solution is to close the fishery because the resources are overexploited. This is not always true, and this has to be based on indicators and reference point. And these are translated in decision rules. Harvest strategies, another very important point that I would like to focus is the uncertainty concept. Harvest strategies reduce uncertainty via pre-agreed decision rule like the harvest control rule and the safeguards. So if you want to be precautionary, you just set your limit of safeguards very low, and you have, in this way, you have the best approach in order to have the most effective harvest control rule. Another takeaway from this lecture is that the Adriatic demersal plan, as is operationalized via the annual effort quota and biomass triggers, is overall it worked, in my opinion, and is very good example that we can see how the effort control can work, even if all the shortcomings I listed before about the effort control. Another important point, takeaways from this lecture, is that monitoring and compliance are important as the rule itself. So it's not enough to decide on harvest control rule to have the best stock assessment model, to have the best data collection if your compliance is low. This is something that we always need to consider, especially when, as scientists, we want to develop management strategy evaluation, that they have to consider this implementation error. So when I say, okay, I have this harvest control rule that has been simulated within in the framework of management strategy evaluation, of course, we need to consider the implementation error. So how this is implemented. This is very important point that I would like to you take away from one of the final outcome of this lecture. Some point of discussion. Okay, one point of discussion in the case of the Adriatic, which are the more robust indicators for the demersal fishing in the Adriatic? Well, we have seen that providing F over FMSY and these biomass limits has been very important for the development of the Adriatic management plan. How to detect and correct effort creep in an effort-based harvest control rule. This is a very important point. Of course, the effort creep is increasing year by year. We assume that this effort creep is an increasing catchability of almost 2% every year. So this has to be considered, because especially in an effort-based harvest control rules. So in order to be precautionary, when your F over FMSY is request a 20% reduction in 10 years, for example, I do just an example, okay, you have to consider that in 10 years, your effort unit is going to be more efficient. Because every year you have this effort creep. When should spatial measure complement effort control? This is another very important point for discussion, because we have seen the example of common sole. The common sole in the Adriatic was 15 years ago was very in an overfishing situation. The F was almost 1.5 time the FMSY, and the overfishing has been reduced year by year because there was this spatial measure that would protect the juvenile. The closure of the 4 nautical miles first and then 6 nautical miles after the fishing ban has been crucial for the common sole, because after the fishing ban in late summer, beginning of fall, this juvenile of common sole, they start moving from coastal waters to the offshore waters. So if we manage to keep away the bottom troll and especially the main troll activity in that month, as this had clearly this effect. And this spatial measure will be a very important complement in order to improve the situation of other stock, like in Norway lobster. The only solution of Norway lobster in order to have a rebuild of the stock in each functional unit is not to close completely the fisheries. The solution is a certain area, especially because this is a species that doesn't move a lot. Of course, it's a borrowing stock, so it creates his own shell in the sea bottom. So you need to have a very good knowledge of the concentration area of your functional unit, and the best approach is to close the area rather than to give an advice of effort equal of 0 fishing days. Another important point of discussion is how can MSC refine the harvest control rule basket and safeguards? Of course, this is very important. So the simulation we can develop with the management strategy evaluation can tell us if our harvest control rule is working and if we need to consider other indicators in our harvest control rules. And the other indicators can be, for example, economic indicators. So I can have a perfect harvest control rule in terms of biological point that would rebuild my stock in very few years, in very few 2-3 years. But on the counterpart, you have an harvest control rule very strict that is going to destroy the fishery in economic terms. So in that case, the MS management strategy evaluation, if it's carried out in a framework that involve also other stakeholders, rather fishing operators, like fishmonger or people involved in the grade distribution, for sure can refine the harvest control rule. And this is the case when you have rules that says, okay, you can reduce the catch for tuna of 10% every year, but not more than that, because we need a certain amount of product in order to have the industry efficient. Another important discussion point is the climate change. So what changes climate shifts productivity and distribution? This is a crucial point. Of course, we can discuss about this if you want, but at the moment, what we can see in the example of the Adriatic is that climate shifts productivity and distribution. So we see that certain resources are moving toward north, common salt, for example, but also are impacting the productivity as the Norway lobster. So again, remember always that fishery is carried out in the ecosystem, and climate is a big impact on the ecosystem and modify the productivity of all the stocks. And it's very difficult to predict this change in productivity and also in the distribution. And we need the science, we need knowledge in order to predict this and in order to manage. So I would stop here for today as lecture. It's your last time to have question. Otherwise, I would present the assignment that I taught for you. And
with question now.
Please.
Okay, so students are coming because we have the microphone on the
meeting. Yeah, I understand. No problem.
Sorry.
Okay. Thank you for the lesson. I have a question. If I understand well, the stock of European hake is recovering.
Yes.
Do you think this could affect the stock of nephrops? Because we know that, especially from big individuals, there's some predation on nephrops.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, this is a very good point. And absolutely, the increase of the biomass of European hake has an impact on Norway lobster, but also on the pink shrimp. So there was a colleague from CNR that she tried to develop a sort of simplified approach of the mice model in order to try to understand this. But absolutely, this is a very good point, and is something that is one of the shortcomings of the management plan. I mean, the management plan cannot at the moment doesn't consider this interaction. So this is a very good point that is something to add in the what remains hard in the management plan is the ecological interaction, the trophic interaction among the target stocks. So thank you for sharing this.
Thank you. We have another question.
Oh, please.
Hi, Giuseppe, Enrico from Ancona.
Oh, sorry.
Relating to the last thing you mentioned, so about the climate shift, I know that we didn't go into too much detail about the actual model of stock assessment that you use, but in general terms, I mean, for sure, yes, but what is the process, if there is a process going on into incorporating environmental characteristics variable into the stock assessment model? And because I know that in some areas they're starting to use these environmental variables, but I don't know about the Adriatic Sea. And
absolutely, very good point. Very good point. Thank you, Enrico. All the stock assessment that I showed you here, this outcome, unfortunately, they do not consider any environmental parameter at the moment. At least they do not consider directly. They consider them at the moment indirectly because we assume a certain amount of fishing of natural mortality that could affect the productivity of the stock and could be related with the climate change. But it's also true that at the moment, no one of the single species, the demersal stock assessment, has an environmental parameter. And this is something that needs to be improved. And in order to improve this, you need to have, first of all, the data, which is not so obvious sometimes. And also you need to have models, integrated models that would allow you to change, for example, the stock assessment productivity year by year. You have, for example, you can consider regime shift within your model. And at the moment, the model, even if some of them are very complex, like the model of Norway lobster, at the moment they don't allow you this. Probably the best approach would be first to develop model with environmental parameters for small pelagics, and then try to apply to the demersal. Probably, but to be honest with you, is very hard because in a way that changes impacting the productivity of the stocks, not only in the Adriatic ones, but in most of the stocks, because some stocks that are favored, some other are not. So it's never so easy. So, but anyway, this is another important point that at the moment the management plan is not considering at all, and there isn't a lot of example of management plan that are considering these environmental parameters. Well, there is actually in Alaska. Actually, the management in Alaska is there is a sort of a risk scenario that can consider the climate change, but is very one single case. So I hope I clarified this point.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually referring to the Alaska example.
Yes, Alaska is, yes. In the case of Alaska, is a very interesting case. I didn't think honestly to talk about. I wanted to focus on an area that is close to us, but in the Alaska stock assessment, I would say that there is a completely different example because, first of all, they are so lucky that they have the data of the fishery since the beginning of the fishery. So the fishery was developed in the last 50, 70 years, and they have the data since the beginning. So they know exactly how was the status of the stock when the stock was still virgin, and something that for the Mediterranean is impossible. First thing. Second, they have one of the best data collection system of the world because they have full coverage of observer of all the fleet. They have the best scientific knowledge in terms of stock assessment modeling. And they also use this risk approach where they change their management that is all catch-based, is all quota-based management, which is, of course, more effective. They change the quota based on this risk table, which considers also environmental parameters. If there are environmental parameters that tell us that the recruitment of a certain stock is going to be low, of course they reduce the TAC, and of course they are much more precautionary. So Alaska, if someone of you wants to consider, is very good case for the assignment that I'm going to give you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So if you want, I can show you the assignment. I don't know if you already shared it with the other students.
No, not yet, because we have to share everything, the recording of this lesson, the PowerPoint, and
Okay.
Okay, if you have already, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so the assignment I was thinking is to design for you another strategy for a randomly selected region. So this assignment follows the lecture workflow that is from data collection, indicator, assessment, harvest strategy, harvest control rule, management plan, monitoring, and review. So by the end of it, I hope you learn how to translate objectives into indicators, identify what data are needed and feasible to support the advice, propose an assessment approach consistent with the data availability, design an operational harvest strategy with clear harvest control rule and safeguard, turn the harvest control rule into concrete implementable management plan, explain how you would test and refine the strategies. So I don't ask you to do an MSc, but just to think, how would you develop an MSc? So the first part is for you is to select an area. We discussed of the world. We discussed, for example, now Alaska, but you can decide an area. Okay, I would exclude Adriatic just because of you have just the example from me, but I would suggest you to choose an area, and Alaska could be a very good example for the Northwest Pacific, or Peru, Chile, where fishing is very important, for example, for the anchoveta. And of course, you have to report your area, and you should have a just basic knowledge of the fishing fleets, as I explained in the case of the Adriatic. Then choose your target stock or stocks using a case study. You can select one target stock or a small complex of stocks, max 2 or 3 in a mixed fishery. The requirement is that your stock choice must be grounded on a real documented case study, such as a stock with the published stock assessment and advice, an RFM of stock, for example, a tuna or a large pelagic, a national managed stock, or something that is it could be even a data limited stock. The important is that there is a stock assessment that you can use in order to develop your harvest strategy. And so in your report, of course, you need to have common name, the scientific name. You need to define the management unit, so the area, the fleets. So you have to find all this kind of information that are I presented for the case of the Adriatic. So at the end, your deliverable that I want you to submit is a written report of 4 pages. Of course, you can use figures and tables, of course. And it should be divided. I gave you a sort of headings, sub-headings if you want to use, but anyway, you are free to use. It's just to give you an idea. First of all, you have to give a context and the problem framing, so the fishery overview, the key issue motivating these management objectives. For example, you see that there is overfishing risk, the governance context, who is the RFMO responsible? Is the national authority, are the national authorities involved in the governance context, are setting the measure in accordance, sometimes not. For example, in the Indian Ocean, there are countries that even if a part of the IOTC, they don't want to comply with IOTC rules. So again, it's something that you have to consider in your governance context. So, of course, you need to define from the literature the objective and the performance metrics. You have to consider the biological and ecological objectives, the economic, the social, and operational. And for each objective, you should define a measurable metric, like the probability of be below BLIM, long-term average catch, the interannual variability, the percentage of trips that are compliant, the observer coverage. If you want to have a spatial footprint indicator, if relevant, so many things. So you can define your objective, your performance metric as much as you like. Again, it doesn't need to be very exhaustive in this sense. You can have just F over FMSY, like in the context of the Adriatic. We have F over FMSY and the stock point of biomass below with certain trigger would be enough. The important is that you take this example from the literature and you try to compile all together. Another point is that you provide also information in your report about the data collection plan, so which fishery independent data are included, and also you consider all the key uncertainty. Then I want you report in that area for that stock what kind of stock assessment is considered, and specify the indicators. Then you, and this is the part that is very crucial to me, is that you you describe your harvest strategy as pre-agreed decision system. Monitoring the inputs, reference point. So all this has to be referred in the definition of your harvest strategy. Then you provide at least one main harvest control rule. It's the basic thing. And this harvest control rule has to imply, of course, a traffic-like approach, if possible. And then you have to define how to translate this harvest control rule in an implementable plan. And again, this is the main part that is for you. So, of course, until here you can take all this information from the literature. For example, from the NOAA website, you have all this information for all the Alaskan stock, for example. And then you develop your management plan in the case is missing, or in the case the management plan that is applied you don't like and you don't want to. You are free. You can report exactly the management plan that is is carried out in that area, or you can also develop your own management plan. And also I would like, in the last part, that you describe how would you test this management plan. What logic would you use in order to test the performance of the management plan? So this is the assignment, of course, is try to have also a reference list of all the data sources with link in order so I can check if you are referring to something that is a real case study. And so it's an assignment that, of course, needs you to go and look case by case and develop something that is feasible and something that is well supported by scientific evidence. And because in the area I listed here is full of stock assessment, is full of control measures that are well reported by the RFMOs, I suggest you to look online all this kind of information. I mean, for example, the Black Sea, there is the turbot in the Black Sea is a very historical management plan, which is supported by the scientific stock assessment carried out in the framework of GFCM. There is a quota system for some countries. So you have you can have many different examples from real. I mean, what I ask you is to start from real example and report as much as you find, and then develop the way. Point G is develop how would you develop your management plan. Again, you can report what is actually the plan implemented, or you can change and you can provide other advice. But all the advice you provide is important that are based on scientific evidence. Of course, you cannot say you cannot develop a management plan based on harvest control rule that is completely fantasy, like I don't know, a tuna management plan that is based only on effort control of one fleet, for example, is not going to work. And again, you need to tell me why it's not going to work. I mean, for example, all the management plan of tuna fisheries, for example, the rebuilding plan of bluefin tuna, that now is not anymore a rebuilding plan in the bluefin tuna of the Mediterranean Eastern Atlantic. It started as a rebuilding plan because the stock was very in low status, and now is changed in a management plan because the stock rebuilt. But again, the harvest control rule that has been used for the bluefin tuna was output control, was based on catch, but was based on catch of all the fleets, not only the longliner or only the pure seine, because otherwise was not going to work. And I would like that you do this critic analysis on the management plan, and you propose something that has to be based on scientific evidence. So is it clear? I hope yes.
Yeah, the reply yes from the classroom.
Okay, I don't know. I think you have several months in order to do this assignment, I think. I don't know.
Yes, the deadline is the 12th of June.
Okay, so I'm sure that someone is going to provide me your report. And I said 4 or 5 pages plus figures, okay, but don't give me a report of 60 pages because I'm not going to read 60 pages. So try to be very efficient. I mean, I don't need that you provide to me all the text. Just what I need is the numbers and the logic behind that numbers. Okay.
Okay, perfect. So thank you, Dr. Scarcella.
Thank you, and I hope you are still alive. Bye. Have a nice day.
Bye. Thank you. Have a nice
Bye.
day.
Bye.